It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Sara Mackey, who's a longtime friend of UUFR. You can see from the bulletin, she's been a busy lady and has had a lot, I've done a lot of things in the world that support Unitarian Universalist congregations. But the important thing to me is that she has been with us a lot. I guess when I joined, Sara was part of UUFR even then. And she's been with us in good times and not such good times. I remember she was here the Sunday after the 2016 election to assure us that things would, look at the big picture, ensuring that things would be okay eventually. So that was kind of nice service. I also, in the service that Sara talked about, the one where we broke ground for this building, and there was a small tent outside, and we all gathered under the tent, and of course, with Sara officiating, it rained. It rained hard enough so people standing at the end of the tent got wet. And so Sara always looks at the positive part, so she seemed to feel that this was nature's blessing, and that being rained on would be a good story to add to the history of UUFR, and I think she was right. So we're looking forward to hearing about what's the question.
When I was having chemotherapy a couple of years ago, I had an experience that has stayed with me. I shared it by email with the rector of the Episcopal Church that I attend now. He is also a cancer survivor, and he was so faithful, walked the path with me from the very beginning. So helpful. As you may know, many of you that have known me for a while, I'm not a very good religious person. I don't believe the right things. I'm not uplifted by creed or dogma. And I don't think God is an old white man that's going to make my life turn out the way I want it, as long as I ask often enough and nicely enough. So when I told this story to the rector, I wondered, is this a story about God? Here's the story. When I was first diagnosed, the oncologist told me all this stuff about chemotherapy, which was going to be the first step in my treatment, and how long it was going to last and what the drugs were going to. It was just like, womp. It was too much information. I couldn't absorb it, except I knew when it was going to start, and I knew when it was going to end. I had 20 weeks of chemotherapy, and I said to myself, okay, I'll do it for 20 weeks, and then it will be over. So, let me put my water down. So, I don't know how many weeks it was into my treatment, when the nurse came in and told me that I couldn't get a treatment that week. I went a little bit nuts. She said my white blood count was too low, and there would be such a risk of infection that they wouldn't do the treatment. And I said, I do not care, I will take the risk, go ahead and do it anyway. But of course she wouldn't, and she said, don't worry about this. It happens all the time, it happens to everybody, it doesn't mean it's going to keep happening, just don't worry about it. But that was no comfort to me. I was really disheartened. Later on that week, I went to my acupressure therapist, and such a wise and kind woman, and I told her how frustrating it was because there wasn't anything I could do. I couldn't just manufacture white blood cells by an act of will. And she said, I believe imagination is a really powerful force. So your assignment for this session is imagine something that will help you visualize white blood cells, producing white blood cells. Well, I did think about it, and in fact, I came up with a good visualization that I used throughout that treatment, and I used all throughout the week, especially when I was going to sleep at night. This is what I visualized. In my yard, there's something that grows in little patches flat on the ground. Can I put this water down? And it's got little white flowers, not even as big as my fingernail. They look like plus signs, 4 little petals. And I don't know what it is, and it appears once in a while, but I imagined those little white flowers as white blood cells. And I would visualize my entire backyard covered with this, whatever this ground cover was. And then I would visualize another layer, but this time just the white flowers. And that would spread all over the backyard. And then more and more and more layers of those white flowers until it looked like my backyard was covered in snow. But it wasn't snow, it was those little white flowers. And then I imagined that everything that eats in my yard, the birds, squirrels, rabbits, chipmunks, all of those creatures could come and eat and eat and eat, and they could stand in one place and just eat as much as they wanted, and the flowers never diminished. No matter what they ate, more and more flowers would grow back up. And then one night when I was visualizing, I thought about the bird feeder in my backyard that I don't use anymore. When I was using it, the seeds that would fall on the ground were growing rats. And I tried several ways to get rid of the rats and they didn't work, so I just quit feeding the birds, and the rats went away. And I thought to myself, there's enough for them to eat. And the more they eat, the more the white flowers keep growing, so I guess I might as well let the rats in too. And when I thought that, I realized I wasn't visualizing white blood cells at that point. I was visualizing the communion table. Enough for everybody. More than enough for everybody. Even the ones I did not like. Even the ones I would have never thought to invite. And when I realized that, I felt God, the way I experienced God, was with me. It wasn't religious, it wasn't magical, it wasn't mystical. It was just, hey, it's me. I'm here. Not I'm going to cure your cancer, not I'm going to produce more white blood cells, just I'm here. The following week, when I went for chemo, I was resigned to the fact that my chemo was going to last more than 21 weeks, and I might as well just get used to that. You have to, or I did, have to have a blood test before every treatment. And since I flunked the blood test the week before, this one, they did something different and it took longer. So I waited and waited, and finally the nurse came in and she said, "You're good to go." And she started pumping that poison into my vein, much to my relief, I'm going to be honest. She told me what my blood count was, and it was double what it had been the week before. If you are a scientist or a medical professional, you probably have an explanation for that. If you are a good religious person, maybe you have an explanation for that. But I'm not any of those things, and I don't have any explanations. But I know what happened. I was there. I needed white blood cells. I visualized white blood cells. I realized I was visualizing the communion table. I felt something that I experienced as God with me. My white blood count doubled. Each of those things happened. Are they interrelated? I don't know. It's possible. Did I just tell a story about God? I don't know. It's possible. Although I don't know the answers to the questions I had about this experience, I know that the experience provided healing. Asking if I just told a story about God framed that experience in a way that was healing for me. Asking what might have caused my white blood cells to double, that might have been a question that a scientist would want to ask and would find some comfort in that. That didn't help me. But the elements of the story are these: a need, a visualization to help with the need met. Those things could have happened to anybody, but different people are going to have different degrees of need to answer the question, why? Some people aren't going to rest until they know why. Other people on the whole other end of the spectrum, knowing why doesn't matter. Now, it's important to note in my story that the element of communion, which was very important to me, wouldn't be so important to somebody for whom communion meant something different. What communion means to me is a story for another time, but we can still embrace that vision of all the creatures having everything they needed to eat. This same event, the way I experienced it, could have happened to a different person who would have never wondered if it was a story about God. What questions would have made it a healing experience for that person? Maybe questions about how chemotherapy affects white blood cells. Would knowing more scientific information promote healing for someone? What about questions that would lead to greater understanding of visualization and how that works? Those approaches would be interesting to me, I predict, but not healing. So how do we know how to ask the healing questions as well as the informational questions? I'm going to tell another story that I'll use as an example and maybe can provide some insight. My son told me a little over a year ago about taking my 4-year-old grandson to the emergency room. He fell and hurt his arm. And my son said he was much more distressed than usual, and he couldn't be comforted, and my son could not help him calm down. And he said at one point, "Why is this happening to me?" Parenthetically, I'll say that they did go to the emergency room and he was okay. Plus, he was delighted by the pictures of his bones that the doctor showed him and very kindly explained to him. We don't know what made that fall hurt so badly. We don't know. There was nothing wrong with his arm that needed treatment, so we don't know what happened. But I think from his 4-year-old perspective, when he said, "Why is this happening to me?" he was asking what an adult might ask, what made this fall different from other times? Why is the pain persisting? Why can't my dad help me out? Why can't my dad comfort me? All these questions reflected distress about his unexpected and unrelieved pain. Can we imagine how this exact experience could have been easier if the questions could have been different? Of course, that's asking too much of a 4-year-old, but just using this story as an example, I wonder how it would feel if somebody could ask questions like, "Something's wrong, who can help me? How do I get to them? What can I do in the meantime to help relieve this pain? Can I imagine that when I go to bed tonight, I won't have any more pain and this whole thing will be resolved?" Notice that in this example, the person that we're speculating about is not asking questions that don't help. Questions like, how much is this going to cost? How long is it going to take me to wait in the medical center? What if my arm is broken? How am I going to manage? So when we are in a situation when we're struggling, it might be possible to shift our perspective, calm our struggle, by asking questions that lead to healing instead of questions that lead to anxiety. We can hold every question we ask in the light of one fundamental touchstone. Is this helping me? If it's not, we don't need to ask it, not in that moment. Also, we can explore whether we really need answers, or can we let the questions lead us into deeper imagining. When I visualized white blood cells, I told that story to my rector, and I wondered if I had just told a story about God. I didn't need to know the answer to that question. I just needed to think about the question, see the experience in that light. Knowing about how chemo affects white blood cells was not useful to me, although a scientist may have found that much more useful. When I asked questions about the story in the light of the idea of plenty to eat, in the light of communion, I felt strength and comfort and healing. The answers to the questions were not important. The questions themselves led me to a way of thinking that was helpful instead of distressing. When we find ourselves in dark places, we can pay attention to the questions that present themselves and regard those questions with intention. Are they serving our greatest need? Are they helping? Do we need answers, or are we better served by letting the questions guide us into richer imagination? We can often save ourselves from despair by changing the questions we ask. And so may it be.